Yeah, so my name is Jeffrey Wheatley, and I am a new assistant professor at Iowa State in the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies. And of course, I'm on the religious studies side of things. I'm teaching Introduction to Catholicism, which is a 200 level course. I'm excited to teach this class because I see it as an opportunity to think about the politics of religion in modernity. Of course, I think Catholicism is inherently interesting, and we're talking about Catholicism in this class, but it's also a useful class to also think about these broader issues. So when it comes to modern social and political expectations, Catholics in the hierarchy or the laity have at times been resistors, have at times been producers, and have at times been portrayed as these kind of inherent antagonists to the modern world. So studying Catholicism allows us to question narratives and presuppositions of modernity. And there's a lot that kind of falls under that umbrella, but I'm thinking about, the Protestant assumptions of the category of religion, the emergence of nation states and the sovereignty claimed by them, issues of religious freedom, of capitalism, of the modern banishment of superstitions, things that are called superstitions at least. And I don't know, I feel like the Catholics in the church have had really interesting relationships with each of these very broad modern phenomena. So students in this class, they learn a lot about Catholicism. They get to be nerds of Catholic studies, but it's also a way, and I think studying Catholicism is a really interesting way to think about these broader issues as well that connect to other classes students are taking and issues that they're thinking about. It's somewhat common for people to view and judge Catholicism within the framework of the culture wars. And there's a lot of ideas that fall within that, but I'm thinking a kind of binary of how religion and politics work together, that you have the secular left and then you have the religious right, okay? And this binary is powerful. It has real influence in the world and how people engage and interpret the world. But I do think it can really get in the way of understanding the complexity and diversities of Catholicism. After all, the culture wars have been around for, I don't know, 4 or 5 decades, and is especially pertinent for thinking about the United States, but Catholicism has been around for hundreds, thousands of years in one form or another across diverse regions and cultures. So I think if you're mostly interpreting and judging Catholicism within this very small moment of the culture wars, you're going to miss something, I think. Although at the same time, we also study the culture wars and Catholicism's influence in shaping this environment. So it's kind of a both and approach. On the one hand, there's just very basic info and some basic critical thinking skills. Catholics don't do everything the Pope tells them to, right? I think that's obvious for a lot of students who identify as Catholic, but for those who don't, something to talk about. Basic close reading skills, analyzing power and authority, and so on. But there's two goals I have in this class that are a little bit more complicated, and I hope by the end of the class students have some sense of them, although this is an introductory course. So, we're just starting to think about these harder things. And one of the goals is that Catholicism has shaped modern US politics and culture, but we have to develop frameworks not beholden to some of the assumptions of modern US politics and culture to study the breadth and depth of Catholicism. And the second thing is something I got from engaging with Robert Orsi and other scholars as well, but it's keeping in mind all the caveats about the politics of the word superstition and so on. And it's a category to label certain beliefs as beliefs you think are rational. But keeping all that in mind as a caveat, I want students to leave the class understanding these things we call superstitions are not marginal and they are not going away, okay? Things like backyard shrines, stories of miraculous healing, battles against demons, relationship with supernatural beings. These are more central to modern culture than a lot of students realize, especially because I'm at a STEM-heavy school. So I think there's a particular understanding and shying away from these things we call superstitions, but they're not going away and they're not as marginal as a lot of people think. So we need to learn how to study these things. And this is a way of getting students into the academic study of religion more broadly, is thinking about the category of superstition and what work that category does and what sorts of phenomena it points to. Well, I'm really excited to have students go through the archive of Sister Karita Kent's artwork. In part, she's a native Iowan, was born in Fort Dodge, and is known for her kind of pop art. And there's kind of famous images of her in her religious garb, right, at doing silk screen presses and stuff like that. And yeah, she does kind of 1960s kind of Andy Warhol type art, and I use her art in the creation of my syllabus. So I kind of took one of her templates and put my text over it. And excuse me, one of the reasons I'm excited is, one, she's a native Iowan, and Iowan students really love that. But also I have, for whatever reason, a lot of design students enrolled in this class. So I want them to go through her artwork and teach me something. You know, design and art isn't something I've necessarily focused on in my career. So I'm going to have them go through some digital archives of her work. And I want them to pull out some things that they noticed that maybe I haven't noticed. To be honest, this course is somewhat old school, somewhat traditional. But one of the things I do is I give students flexibility in choosing to take either a final exam or develop some sort of final project. And this final project could be a research essay. Maybe they're really interested in something particular and they want to spend the last half of the semester researching it, but it can also be a podcast, or it could be a website, or it could be a design of some sort. They can create their own art or a piece of architecture. Especially with all the design students I have enrolled. So I hope some students take me up on that and kind of apply their own passions and career aspirations to designing something kind of new and interesting. And it's going to be on them to explain it to me. So I like giving students that flexibility. Some just want to take an exam, and some really want to put themselves into creating something that they can call their own and that they can share with their family, share with their friends. So we'll see. You know, any lectures on the ancient world? I think my expertise is really more in modernity, and especially in the US, but and this course kind of focuses on that, but it's an intro to Catholicism. So we're doing a broad overview, and I kind of have to rely on secondary sources and other scholars' work when I'm giving those lectures and assignments. So, you know, a little nervous. Um, I think also whenever I'm teaching about, you know, white supremacy, whenever I'm teaching about the sex abuse crisis, whenever I'm teaching about abortion, um, I guess maybe it's not I'm nervous so much, but it requires a hard balance of just giving students blunt facts about the fact of white supremacy. But also, you know, there are levels of nuance, and I have to be very deliberate in how I present this information to students. And so it just, I think these types of topics require special care as I'm prepping to introduce them into the classroom. So we can have a productive conversation about these topics, which are kind of difficult for some students. This course is somewhat removed from my current primary projects, which are looking at religious fanaticism, secularism, and a side project on the figure of the devil, which, I mean, that's relevant for studying Catholicism. But thinking about Catholicism and these themes of religion and modernity and Catholicism in the US, it kind of harkens back to the beginning of my academic career, both as an undergrad at Arizona State, working with historian and scholar of Catholicism, Catherine O'Donnell, and at Florida State. And at this point, I was starting to really look at Catholicism, especially in the early US Republic in the 19th century. And I was interested in anti-Catholicism and Catholic efforts to try and fit into the assumptions of American liberalism. And my master's thesis at Florida State was on St. Benedict the Moor, which was the first Black Catholic parish in New York City. So thinking about Catholicism and race. So it feels, when I teach this class, it's almost like a re-engagement or rediscovery of these questions and thoughts that started my career as a scholar of religious studies. So it feels like I'm kind of returning to these formative moments in my trajectory. And it makes it easier to teach because I was like my students in my classes at one point. I was really interested in Catholicism and these bigger questions of modernity. So I can kind of relate to them when they start having questions or get confused or get really excited about something. I'm like, that was me. That was me when I was an undergraduate at Arizona State, starting to think about these things and struggling and working productively to find new ways of thinking about religion and Catholicism in particular. So it's a fun class for me to teach for those reasons.